Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cal Rastiel, and I'm the director of the Burkle Center for International Relations at UCLA. Today, we come together, as we do every year, to honor the life and work of Daniel Pearl. Almost exactly 20 years ago today, Daniel Pearl was murdered in Pakistan while working as a foreign correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. A free and active press has been an essential part of American democracy since our founding. And as a journalist, Daniel devoted his life to seeking truth about the world, and he risked and ultimately gave his life in order to bring that world home to all of us. Today, we remember his work and we honor his legacy. I want to thank our partners, the Daniel Pearl Foundation, UCLA Hillel, and the Annenberg Foundation for helping us make this event happen. And for this year's Daniel Pearl Lecture at UCLA, we're fortunate to have as our guest someone who has long been a central voice in debates over freedom, tyranny, and our duties to others. Bernard-Henri Lévy is a French philosopher, filmmaker, activist, and the author of over 45 books, including The Will to See, Dispatches from a World of Misery and Hope, The Virus in the Age of Madness, and American Vertigo, Traveling America in the Footsteps of Tocqueville. In 2003, he published Who Killed Daniel Pearl? Lévy's work as an intellectual and writer is uniquely intertwined with humanitarian activism. In the 90s, he was instrumental in pushing the West to intervene to stop the ethnic cleansing and atrocities committed in the former Yugoslavia. In 2002, he was appointed France's special envoy to Afghanistan. Almost a decade later, he was instrumental in the intervention by NATO in Libya. And since 2015, he has worked closely with Kurds in their fight against ISIS and produced 2 films about it, Peshmerga and the Battle of Mosul, which is the only first-hand account of the fall of the Caliphate's capital. Most recently, as I'm sure we'll hear more about today, he visited Ukraine and has pushed widely for stronger support from the West for Ukrainian resistance to Russian aggression. We're honored to have Bernard-Henri Lévy join us today, and we look forward to hearing from him on what I'm sure is a wide range of topics. But before we get to hear from him, as is our tradition at the Pearl Lecture, we have a few preliminaries. We'll begin with brief remarks from Rabbi Aaron Lerner of UCLA Hillel. Then Judea Pearl, Daniel's father and an emeritus professor here at UCLA, will say a few words of remembrance. Following Professor Pearl, Bernard-Henri Lévy will give this year's Daniel Pearl Memorial Lecture. And as he concludes, I will come on, I'll have a conversation with him, and then we'll turn to questions from all of you. So please use the Q&A portal on the bottom of your Zoom screen to submit your questions, and I will pose those questions to him. Today's event is being recorded and will be available on YouTube and other platforms soon. So now let me please welcome on screen Rabbi Aaron Lerner.
Thank you so much, Cal. One of my favorite things about working with college students is the chance to see how this newest generation, they're always 18 to 22 in my world, interacts with technology and approaches life's big questions. It will come as a surprise to some of you on this call that our newest students at UCLA seem somewhat less interested in telling everyone else what to do and how to think. Perhaps they're feeling fatigued generally, I know a lot of us are, or worn out specifically from the culture war and online vitriol that has characterized their high school experience. Or perhaps they're genuinely engaged in pursuing the kind of higher understanding that college is supposed to promote. In any case, it's refreshing. Of course, this shift has not yet permeated the halls of power. In southern states, we continue to see efforts to tell people what they can and cannot do with their bodies and which words they can and cannot say in the classroom. Of course, here in California, curricular requirements now dictate the lens through which our students are to see the world. And we just witnessed a culture war literally about covering our mouths. Of special note, here in the UC system, departmental websites and other official channels continue to be used by certain faculty to promote their personal political beliefs. And that's in spite of the incredible efforts of Professor Pearl and other faculty and many others within the state to combat this new and pernicious problem. With all of that in mind, I'm hopeful and optimistic that this newest generation of students represent the positive change towards more openness and learning. Without further ado, and with great appreciation for you, Professor Pearl, and everything that you're doing to push these efforts forward, it's my honor to welcome you to turn on your camera and to unmute so that you can join us here today. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Carl and Rabbi Lerner, for introducing the event and the speaker. And thank you all for being with us today, friends and colleagues and students, sponsors, supporters, and all members of the UCLA communities for whom this annual event, an annual lecture, has become a cultural landmark of shared aspiration and shared values. This year's lecture is special on two accounts. First, it marks 20 years since that dreadful day where on February of 2002, when we were notified of Dani's murder in Karachi, Pakistan. Second, it is the first to take place without the inspiring presence of Dani's mother, Ruth Pearl, who passed away a few months ago. Ruth was the driving force behind this annual event, from choice of speakers to preparing the invitation lists. The theater just doesn't look the same without her. I'm very happy, though, that Dani's sisters, Tamara and Michelle, are with us today. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to exchange a few words of remembrance with my son, Dani. Same words that I used on the first anniversary of his death 19 years ago. I said, "You live an extraordinary life, Dani, and you died an extraordinary death. You lived a life that knew no geographical boundaries, with a spirit that knew no malice. Through words and music, you communicated joy, humor, friendship, and understanding to many people in many parts of the world. You found colors where we saw only gray. You heard music in what we took for noise. You saw people where we read statistics. In your death, you held your head up high, higher than any of us can imagine. And you gave us those precious words, "I am Jewish," that have come to symbolize the right of every individual to assert his or her identity and seek the dignity of being different. This is your victory, Dani, the victory of the boldness with which you loved humanity. It is the victory of every human freedom, forever suffering to be at large, forever daring the impossible. It is now my great pleasure and immense honor to introduce our speaker, my friend, my mentor, and my hero, Bernard-Henri Lévy, a true champion of humanity, whose life, writings, and journeys and movies so closely personify the spirit and legacy of Daniel Pearl. We first met at our home, where he came to interview us for his book, Who Killed Daniel Pearl, and we bonded immediately when he asked to see Danny's room, his books, his violin, and even his soccer trophies. Then, as the book came out, we were stunned by the poetry with which he captured the essence of Danny's soul. "There is the Danny," he writes. "I have read his articles, who, even if he is proud of America, thinks that America, and in general the West, has an obligation to the world, owes the world something. There is the die-hard humanist, who, in spite of everything he sees and has seen in his life, continues to want to believe that man is not a predator to another man, but a brother, a kindred spirit. There is that face, he continues. There aren't that many in which our era can see itself without shame. Thank you, Bernard-Henri, for honoring Danny with your lectures today.
My dear Julia, I want to tell you first how moved I am, humbled and moved by your words. For me, our meeting in Encino, California, will remain in my memory and in my heart till the end of my life. I remember so well every second of Ruth and your so warm welcoming. I remember every detail of our conversation, of the child room of Danny, and of all the tiny, therefore hugely important informations you provided me that day. And I have such a great souvenir of Ruth. You know, Julia, what I told you the very day we met about her. She reminded me the dearest lady in my life by her way of being, her way of speaking of a beloved son. You know that. We spoke of that, the three of us, and it is such a distress and such a sadness that she is not here with us tonight to commemorate this 20th anniversary. So thank you, Julia. Thank you, Rabbi Lerner. Thank you, all the friends of the UCLA and the sponsors who made this event possible. And salut, good morning to the colleagues of Danny Pearl, who I suppose attend also this event, his colleagues of this newspaper, which since 20 years I only call in homage to Danny, the journal. For me, the Wall Street Journal being his newspaper, the newspaper to which he was dedicated, is only for me and always, and some of the colleagues of Danny know that well, the journal. So salute to all of you. For me, it's an important event to celebrate this precise anniversary, the 20th. Because I made an oath 20 years ago when I wrote the book which Julia just mentioned, when I engaged myself in this long and difficult investigation, when I committed myself to put my feet in the footsteps of Daniel Pearl in Karachi, and of his murderers in Islamabad, in Afghanistan, and in other parts, I took the engagement, I made the oath to contribute modestly as much as I can till the end of my whole life to keep vibrant the memory of Daniel Pearl. I remember so well the day I heard the confirmation of his death. I was in Afghanistan in the office of the then president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, and he announced me the news. And strangely enough, I knew nothing about Danny. I never met him in his life of grand reporter, and in my own life of reporter too. We never met. Nevertheless, when I heard the news that this brave young American Jewish reporter was dead, I received this news as a very strange, mysterious shock, a personal shock. And I remember so well, I asked Hamid Karzai, it was before the cell phones. I only had a sort of big Turaya telephone with me, which was not working in most of places in Kabul. I asked President Karzai to indicate me a place where my Turaya could work. I was conducted to the roof of the presidential palace with a group of American security persons. And from the roof of the presidential palace of Hamid Karzai, I called my French publisher. And I told him, my friend, I published already 20 or 25 books. My next book, I must tell you, I announce you, will be entitled Who Killed Daniel Pearl? My French publisher did not know at this time a lot, and maybe hardly nothing about Danny. He asked me to repeat. I repeated on this stupid Turaya telephone, which was half working, trying to capture the satellite. I tried to explain to him what I knew of the story. And I remember so well this man, my publisher, Olivier Nora, telling me, okay, be careful, be safe, but go on. Go on, it's your duty, you have to do that. And it's good that a French writer, a French intellectual, commits himself in celebrating the souvenir and the highness, the grandeur of a young American hero. This day, I decided to devote the necessary time, finally it was 1 year, to understand what happened, to understand why Daniel Pearl was abducted, why he was tortured in such a savage way, and why he was killed. It was my first oath, my first sermon, my first promise, to take the necessary time in order to discover. And the second one, to keep the memory alive as long as I will be myself alive. So I devoted this year going to Akbar Hotel in Rawalpindi, in the very room where Danny met Omar Sheikh, who was the man plotting the kidnapping and responsible for his killing. I spent time going in Karachi, in the place where he was kept, trying to breathe the air which he did breathe till the end, trying to catch the dark spirit of the place. I met some militants of the Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, of the Lashkar-e-Toiba, of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, those radical Islamist groups who gathered, who assembled their forces, who organized a sort of joint criminal venture, all of them, tens, dozens of persons, in order to torture and to kill this single one. And I soon understood that for so many forces having to gather, for so many people having to be implicated, for someone as important as Khalid Sheikh Mohammed being in the plot, because in January 2003, I discovered the implication of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the aim, the target, the challenge should be very high. That it was not just a group of crazy radical Pakistanis abducting and making an example to the rest of the world with just an American journalist. I very soon got the conviction that behind this story, there was a huge story. And huge story meant for me that something of our future, something of the time in which we were entering in 2002, 2003, was at stake with this murder. And that in this little house of the outskirts of Karachi, where Danny was tortured, something, as the philosophers of my youth would have said, something of the spirit of the world was at stake. L'esprit du monde, as Hegel would have said. So why? Who and why Daniel Pearl was killed? Who I very quickly discovered. I quoted the name of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. It is at the end of the book. I had a meeting with him at the end, which was missed finally. Those who read the book know how and why. Who all the groups constituting, building what was just known since September 11 as Al-Qaeda, all the cells, the building cells, the bricks of Al-Qaeda, whose center was not in the Middle East, by the way, whose center was in Pakistan and Afghanistan, did coalesce themselves for this work of horror and for this work of criminality. So who? Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Al-Qaeda, and the Pakistani secret services. This is one of the things which I soon discovered and which I documented in my book and which has never been denied by anyone. It was the close and deep and concrete implication of the Pakistani secret services. Secret services of a country which was supposed to be an ally of the United States of America, and which were secret services of a rogue state. I had all the proofs of the implication of the ISI, starting for the example I just mentioned a few minutes ago, the very place where Danny met his murderer, Omar Sheikh, this Akbar Hotel, where I reserved and stayed at the very room when the meeting happened, was a hotel completely controlled by the ISI, was a hotel which was a place of rendezvous, a place of meeting for all the Kashmiri militants who were under the spell and under the control of the ISI, and so many examples of that. So I reached very soon to precise conclusion about who. About why. My conclusion was very soon the following. Because he was an American, and because we were entering in a time when being an American was becoming a crime, a time of huge, overwhelming anti-Americanism, where every American guy was considered as a legitimate target. He was killed, number two, because he was a Jew. And because Pakistan, who was at the end of the day not very familiar with Jewry, not very concerned with Israel and Palestine. The Palestine of Pakistan was at this time, and still is probably, to Kashmir. This is their problem. They were not very familiar. I met during this long year many Pakistani officials, many officers in charge of the so-called investigation about the crime. I discovered that they had a very remote idea of what being a Jew meant. Nevertheless, we were entering in a time where, at the scale of the world, alas, in the Muslim world in particular, and I say alas because Danny Pearl was one of the Westerners, not only one of the Jews, but one of the Westerners who extended the most brotherly hand to the world of Islam and to his Muslim brothers in Saul. But Pakistan, this area of the world and the world in general, were entering in a time where the old anti-Semitism was taking new colors and was raging and infuriating himself. And he was victim of that. And of course, he was victim of the fact that he was a journalist and a great journalist. And in the case of what he was doing at that time, a considerable journalist. I tried during the second part of my investigation, the second part of the year 2002, I tried to rebuild the investigations in which Danny Pearl was involved when he was kidnapped. He was making an investigation about a sort of a spiritual master of bin Laden called Gilani. He was making an investigation about the shoe bomber, very famous at this time. But the conclusion I reached was that the article, which would have been probably an intellectual bomb, and which he was not permitted to write, which he had to be prevented at all means to conclude, was an article about a man called Abdul Qadir Khan, sort of scientist, militant of a radical Islamist party, and who was the inventor of the Pakistani nuclear bomb. Abdul Qadir Khan, on whom Danny was investigating, was this sort of man who, with his right hand, was a great scientist, able to resolve the most complicated equations and to be a Pakistani Oppenheimer. And with his left leg, he was able to stand at the forefront, at the head of huge demonstrations in Karachi or in Islamabad, praising Pakistan for having the bomb, hoping Pakistan to break the nuclear taboo, and hoping that Pakistan will use his weapon against the enemies of the Muslim world of the jihad and of the future caliphate. And my hypothesis, my conclusion of the book, is that Danny was working on the possible trafficking of nuclear secrets, nuclear devices between governmental organizations in Pakistan, ISI, and non-governmental or charity organizations in Afghanistan, which were for a large part under the umbrella of Al-Qaeda and of bin Laden. So I reached the conclusion that Danny was killed before he was about to write that, because he was the one who discovered the dirty game of Pakistan with Al-Qaeda. That he was the one who was discovering that Al-Qaeda, who was not very well known at this time, was not only an Islamist organization without territory, as it was said by the expert at this time, but that Al-Qaeda did have a territory which was secretly and sometimes openly Pakistan. So for all these reasons, Danny had the terrible honor to become one of the huge symbols of our time. It is not given to so many human beings to see all the forces of a time, all the dark forces, all the dark tendencies of an epoch to gather over its head to make a sort of angel aura in a sense, but also to provoke hell on them. Danny Pearl died because he was the symbol of the best of America, the symbol of the best of the West, because he was the symbol of the highest values of which the Jews try to embody, sometimes with success, sometimes they fail. This is human condition. And because he was the embodiment of a West, which was at the same time lucid, seeing the danger, able to characterize it, to name it, and at the other side, trying his best to prevent the worst, to prevent the clash between civilization, to prevent the war which the radical Islamists were declaring to the Democrats of all countries, of America, of Europe, and of Muslim world, and to prevent it at all costs. Danny Pearl died because he was the embodiment of all this. And because he was partly unwillingly, of course, he was the best of us. Nobody wants to be the best. People try to do their best, to do their duty of humanity. Danny did more. He incarnated more, and this is why we are celebrating his memory today. As for myself, I just want to tell you, before answering the question and remarks which you are going to make, I just wanted to say, to conclude what I said this morning in one of these social networks in my Substack. I just wanted to say that I did a lot of things in my life. I wrote a lot of books. I made some movies and so on. one of the biggest sources of pride of my life. I'm 73 years old now. One of the highest sources of pride, maybe the highest source of pride of my life, is to have met Danny after his death, to have done my best to enter in what I thought was his heart, and to have written this book in homage to his greatness. This, for me, if things had to end tomorrow, would probably be the biggest source of pride of my life. That's why I'm, again, so happy to be here for this special anniversary.
Thank you so much for your remarks and for joining us very late where you are, I believe, in Morocco. Am I right?
No, but
okay. Okay, for some reason I had been told that, but in any event, I'm sure it's late. But we're really appreciative to have you here. So let me ask you, just to start off, you just now referred to Danny Pearl as the embodiment of the West and described a number of forces, deeper forces that lay behind his murder. And so now with 20 years passing, how do you see those forces differently today? So some of the issues you raised around religion and nationalism and other issues in the region, obviously we're in a very different place with regard to Afghanistan, for example. So I'm curious, you can go anywhere you like with this, but what do you see as the most consequential changes with regard to those forces?
Alas, the consequential changes is that the things are worse today. In Afghanistan, we gave back on a silver, we, the West, Americans, Trump, Biden, and France and Europe, we gave on a silver plate Afghanistan to the Taliban. We give a possible caliphate to the remnants of Al-Qaeda and to the survivors of Daesh, of ISIS. So on this ground, the sacrifice of Danny was useless. We did not learn the lesson. And those who decided to step out, to step back, to leave the ground to the Taliban, to abandon the brave ladies who trusted us and who decided to walk in the streets without veil. All those who hoped that we heard the lesson of Danny Pearl understood that we did not. Another ground, journalism. We have, unfortunately, a very recent example. Ukraine, today, at this very minute, there is not a day or a week or a day without learning that a journalist, some American journalist, some European, some Ukrainian journalists are wounded or dead just because they embody the values of courage, of wisdom, and of freedom of information for which Danny Pearl fought all his life. So on these two grounds, alas, I must say that the world did not change and that we did not learn a lot. About Pakistan, it's a mystery. I remember so well when I was making this investigation in 2003, it was the time of the war in Iraq. And I remember thinking, I was in Karachi or in Islamabad, and I was thinking, but my goodness, what a mistake. how can one be so wrong? How can we search some forbidden weapons in a place where they are not, and not see them as the stolen letter of Edgar Poe where they are, which is under my nose? I remember having visited the mosque of Binori town in Karachi, Binori town, which was a mosque, a madrasa, a training camp, a field hospital where Bin Laden himself was cured at this time, and so on. Binori town was a few 100 meters from the American consulate, and I suppose from French consulate too. So such a mistake, such a misunderstanding. Are we out of this mistake? Did we understand the misunderstanding? Do we consider Pakistan as a false ally? Maybe a little more, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all. I'm not sure that the map of the area, as seen by American or French diplomats, has changed so much. And again, it's a pity.
You mentioned Ukraine, and I know you were just there. And so I want to ask about that. You recently wrote an open letter with Salman Rushdie, Sting, Sean Penn, and you said, I'm just going to quote from it, Putin's war of aggression against a free Ukraine is not just a military affair. It's a battle between two concepts of society, two visions of what makes life good or bad, and at bottom, two forms of civilization. So I want to ask you about those competing visions. How do you distinguish them, and which one do you think is prevailing?
How I distinguish? The face of the ladies allowed to be shown, the freedom of press guaranteed, the political quarrels solved in a proper and decent parliament, corruption really fought, real fight against corruption, democracy which is of course imperfect, which never works so well. The definition of democracy is that it does not work, that it is never finished, that it is perpetually unfinished, but that's democracy. On the other side, you have some places where democracy is considered as the evil, le mal, evil, is considered that as hell, is considered as what has to be prevented, whatever it costs. And this is some parts of the Muslim world. There are some parts which are on the process of democracy. You quoted Morocco, which is very exemplary. You have in the Middle East some Muslim countries who have heard the lesson of Daniel Pearl, who are trying to give shape to the dialogue of civilization and to allow the children of Abraham to live together and to have their mosques, their synagogues, and their churches a few yards from each other. So there is a progress, but you have some parts which are still in the darkness of obscurantism. But you have also those who, in Turkey, dream of a revival of Ottoman Empire, shoot the Kurds, shoot their opponents, and consider democracy as the worst regime ever. And you have today Putin. You have Russia, great country, great culture, a huge civilization, which is upon which has fallen a curtain of iron and darkness and stupidity and barbarity. What is happening in Ukraine? I'm back from Ukraine, as you said, a few days ago. What is happening in Mariupol is really what we thought our generations will never see again when we said plus jamais ça, never more that. The that of nevermore is here in Mariupol. So you have today this arm wrestling between women and men everywhere who consider that democracy is a fight which is worth being waged, and people who think that to live in slavery, orthodox slavery, Christian slavery, Muslim, whatever, is the best of which a man can dream. This is a real huge quarrel.
It's interesting to me that you did mention the largest non-democracy, the most powerful.
China,
How do you
yeah.
see China fitting into the story that you just told?
For me, China is at the center of the game. Of course, I did not mention, but I should have started with that. You have today 5 forces, to be completely exhaustive. 5 forces fighting democracy. China, nostalgic of Chinese Empire, nostalgic of Ottoman Empire, nostalgic of Grand Russian Empire, nostalgic of the Persian Empire, Iran, and nostalgic of the Caliphate, which are the radical Muslims, the radical obscurantist Muslims. These are really 5 different forces which had between themselves huge quarrels in the past centuries, but we seem to be coalescing now. It depends on circumstances against a unique and principal and main enemy, not America, not Europe, democracy. It is not a geographic quarrel. It is not East versus West. It is authoritarian, neo-imperialist powers, the 5 I just quoted, against those who believe in free spirit, in open society, in brotherhood, and in democracy. And China is one of 5, is the richest of the 5, is the one who, at the minute we are speaking, has to choose about Ukraine between continue to back Putin, and then the martyrdom of the Ukrainian people will be endless, or be 1 minute reasonable and tell his Putin the little, the ally of China, okay, you are mistaken by your secret services, you misguided us, Chinese, so give us a break. Let's stop. China has a choice. The outcome is probably in the hands today of the Chinese government.
Let me just press you on that, because you stressed democracy, but then you started off listing 5 empires. Or nostalgic empires, or yearning for those empires. So is the issue democracy? Is it nationalism? What is the connection that you see between those? Is democracy compatible with empire in some way?
Between the 5, the similarity is revenge and nostalgia. The 5 I quoted have 2 common points. They were empires, number 1. The empires did fall, and they want to take the revenge against this fall. And they think it is possible. Alas for them, thanks God for us, this never happened. And the empires which they are building now in front of our eyes are cartoon empires, are zombie empires, are fake empires with fake culture. Putin, for example, when we know a little about those who inspire him, those who advise the text he wrote last year about Ukraine. Putin is not a good chess player, but not a good ideologist. He's a real little man. He is the shadow of the ghost, the phantom, the ghost of the imperial models which he has over his head. Nicholas I, his grandfather, who was tasting meals for Stalin, as you know, probably Lenin. He's a shadow, he's a zombie. The chance, the luck for the Democrats in these countries and for us is that these apprentices are zombies. And the culture which they pretend to revive is fake, is a zombie culture. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And when I see the palaces of Erdogan, when I see how he pretends to build in his own home as many dining rooms as the Ottoman, there were times for the Ottoman Empire to die and revive, all this is joke. All this is cartoon. All this is a ghost culture. So nostalgic, zombieism, and revenge and hate of democracy.
Thank you. So we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. There are many. So let me start with the first, which is really about journalism. A number of questions about journalism and your role as, maybe a unique figure in terms of combining journalism and activism and kind of speaking truth to power. But that's the first question. So what is the role of journalists in current international crises in bringing truth to power, such as with the Russian invasion of Ukraine?
To see first and to report what is forbidden to see and to report. The war, the chance of a war, the chance of a massacre, the lucky card of a carnage is to be unseen, is to be covered, is to be undocumented. And if it is undocumented, then the tyranns, the responsible of genocide, have won. In front of them, sometimes they find a great chief, they find a Churchill, sometimes. They find a Roosevelt, okay. But on a more daily basis, on their road, they find a journalist. Journalists go in out of reach places, inaccessible spots, and they take the truth, they document the truth, and they bring it back. They put the iron in the wound, as Albert Londres, one of the masters of modern journalism, said, the iron, the knife in the wound. They take piece of truth in their notebook and they bring it back to us. And this is a crucial role. This is the way, I think, I read all that Daniel Pearl wrote. I read, I think, none of his reportage, at least available, has escaped my attention. It is the way he considered his role. He knew that the dictators, the whoever had a common interest at hiding their bad deeds, and that it was his role to unveil the bad deeds and to bring them back to the Wall Street Journal.
So the next question goes back a little bit to what you talked about a few minutes ago about sort of psychological factors in nations. So what are the socioeconomic, psychological, and other factors that are leading individuals and nations to find an appeal in dictatorship, fascism, etc.? And we see a historic trend toward this in many countries, including the US. So what are those factors that tend to make that strategy appealing?
The fatigue of democracy. Fatigue. Democracy can be harassing. Democracy obliges you to reflect, obliges you to see the complexity of things, compels you to have a hand in your camp and the other hand in the opposite camp. A real democrat in the French term, has one hand in the blue camp and another hand in the red camp. Necessarily, if you are not a fanatic, if you are not someone who does not reflect, if you are a really Democrat, this is the game, to give always a chance to the adverse opinion. And this sometimes is boring. This sometimes is harassing. And in the history of mankind, you have some long periods of time where people say, okay, enough. We are going to give to the masters all the keys of the house, keys of our brain, keys of our liberty. We will ask them to feed us like as the Talmud says, as beasts in great number, just to feed us, and it will be okay. And we will rest for the rest of our life. This exists. There was in the Soviet time a man who turned rather bad after the perestroika, a dissident, but who was called Alexander Zinoviev, a great dissident of the Soviet era and a great writer. And this was his idea, that the communism he was wrong, but part of it was true, that the communism had built a new type of man, that it was not only a tyranny oppressing an intact mankind or humanity, but that really the tyranny had taken advantage of true tendencies which are really living in each of us. So this is how it works.
So the next question is, one of the points noted in your open letter, the letter that I read from, was the necessity to prosecute Putin for war crimes before an international tribunal. How do you see such an endeavor playing out? Are you hopeful for?
I cannot hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yes,
now?
Of course. I think that with my three friends, with my dear brother in Saul Salman Rushdie, with Sting, with Sean Penn, who is a very brave and valiant guy, by the way, even recently in a recent episode, we were probably among the first to say that what Putin was doing should make him end in front of international court. An existing one which has to be created, I don't know. You have one of your colleagues, Philip Sands, who proposes a special court for the crime and a quicker court for the crime which Putin is committing, a court punishing the crime of aggression against the state, not only crimes of war, which could be a longer process, but it's evident. Milosevic was powerful. He was, everybody feared him. He mastered the whole diplomatic game during years in the time of former Yugoslavia. He ended in a court, in the jail of the court. Al-Bashir, who was received as a king, the king of Sudan, the president of Sudan, who was received as a king by all chief of state in the world, finally is finishing now in a jail, in a cell, waiting for the court. And I don't mention other dictators like Gaddafi. So for the four of us, it is evident that in a way or in another, Putin will have to respond of his crimes. A war has some laws. Since the first wars between Sparta and Athens, since the wars in the Bible, war is a state of exception, but which has some laws. Putin is raping the laws, is violating the laws. What happens in Mariupol, the bombing of the civilians, of the churches, of the kindergarten, of the theaters, and so on, are huge crime, which in a way or in another will be punished. I think that when we wrote this open letter, it was one of our first point of agreement. For us, it was an evidence.
Are you confident that that will happen? That he will in fact face some form of justice?
I am confident of the fact that Putin will lose this war. He's already losing. I was a few days ago at the entrance of between Odessa and Mykolaiv. I saw Ukrainian army not only resisting, as we often hear, but counter-attacking, stronger, more valiant, and knowing why they fight. The real problem in a war, the real difference is not the number of weapons, it's the quality of the spirits. This we know that since Herodot, since Thucydide, since Sun Tzu, all the theologians of the world know that. And the spirit is on the side of the Ukrainians. So Putin will lose. The question is, what will be the cost? Of course. How many more civilian casualties? How many more innocents? Even in the Russian side, by the way. These young boys who were told that they were going on the special police operation, who then were told that they will be received with flowers, and who find themselves in hell, they also don't deserve that. And they will be part of the cost, part of the price.
So I think we have time for one final question. So the question is, as the US focuses more diplomatic, economic, security resources on East Asia, what should the future of American engagement with the Middle East look like? And what guiding principles should it adhere to?
The guiding principles are those for which Daniel Pearl lived and those for which the Daniel Pearl Foundation fights, which means to do all that is possible to prevent the clash, which is to answer to stupidity by wisdom, which means to answer to savagery by intelligence and sophistication, which can be also a form of force. But avoid the clash, make the wisdom prevail, defend in spite of everything the values of brotherhood. This should be the outcome. And by the way, I was very few times in my life as impressed as I was when I heard in 2004 or 5, maybe 4, Judea and Ruth pray for and argue in favor of brotherhood in spite of what they lived, in spite of what they saw, because they saw, and in spite of their endless suffering. So this is the people of spirit, the believers in democracy. Their force is there in brotherhood and wisdom, who can be very efficient weapons.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, and we're really pleased to have you join us, Mr. Lévy. And I want to thank all of the audience who's been listening and watching, and we hope to welcome you back again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.